In the preliminary investigation report of Air India Flight AI-171, some shocking revelations have surfaced, ones that have thrown the entire aviation world into a brand new mystery. Just seconds before the crash, someone switched both engine fuel levers from the run position to cut off. But who did it? When both engines began choking after the fuel was cut off, one pilot urgently asked, "Why did you cut the fuel?" The other replied in confusion, "I didn't do it." So, what really happened at such a critical moment during takeoff? Were the switches faulty? Did a pilot do it intentionally? Or was it some strange malfunction? The mystery deepens when we compare this incident to other similar crashes in history, those where pilots intentionally committed suicide mid-flight. Are there hidden similarities between those cases and AI-171? Today, we'll dive deep into this haunting question. Welcome back to another gripping video from Information for All. It was the morning of June 12, 2025, at Ahmedabad International Airport. Just an ordinary day. The weather was slightly warm, the skies crystal clear. Airplanes were taxiing, boarding, and taking off every few minutes. Amid this routine buzz stood a Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner of Air India, tail number VTNB, flight number AI-171. This same aircraft had arrived from Delhi just 2 hours earlier, and now it was preparing for its next journey, Ahmedabad to London. No one on the ground or on board knew that within moments, this very Dreamliner would become the center of global headlines and spark one of aviation's strangest mysteries. In the cockpit sat Captain Sumit Sabharwal, a 56-year-old veteran with over 15,600 flight hours, including 8,200 hours on the Boeing 787. His co-pilot, First Officer Clive Kunder, was 32, with 3,400 total flight hours and 1,128 hours on the same aircraft model. According to the report, both pilots passed their pre-flight breath analyzer test about an hour and a half before takeoff, perfectly fit to fly. The same aircraft, VTNB, had earlier operated Flight AI-423 from Delhi to Ahmedabad. During that flight, a minor technical issue was detected, but the maintenance engineer fixed it before clearing the aircraft for the next departure. Now, everything looked perfect. The plane was refueled with 54,200 kilograms of fuel, carrying a total of 230 passengers. The takeoff weight stood at 213,400 kilograms, completely within the safe range for a Boeing 787. No hazardous cargo was found on board. Everything seemed routine. At 1:13 p.m., the aircraft requested permission from air traffic control for pushback and engine start. By 1:33 p.m. and 45 seconds, ATC instructed the crew to line up on runway 23. The wind speed was a calm 6 knots, around 11 km/h. Visibility 6,000 meters, and skies perfectly clear, a flawless setup for takeoff. At 1:37 p.m. and 37 seconds, the pilot pushed the thrust levers forward, and the aircraft began to accelerate down the runway. This time, First Officer Clive was in control of the takeoff, while Captain Sumit was simply monitoring. According to the flight data recorder, by 1:38 p.m. and 33 seconds, the plane reached V1 speed. That's 153 knots or 283 km/h, the point beyond which takeoff cannot be aborted. 2 seconds later, it reached VR speed, 155 knots, and by 1:38 p.m. and 39 seconds, the Dreamliner lifted off gracefully. Up to this point, everything was absolutely normal. CCTV footage confirmed that takeoff looked smooth, engines roaring, wings lifting, but what happened next changed everything. Just 3 seconds after liftoff, the aircraft hit a speed of 180 knots, engines still producing full thrust. And then, in the blink of an eye, both Engine 1 and Engine 2 fuel switches flipped from run to cutoff, one after the other, barely a second apart. The engines lost fuel instantly. The N1 and N2 readings, the heartbeat of the engines, began to plummet. Thrust faded rapidly. Inside the cockpit, chaos erupted. From the cockpit voice recorder, investigators later heard a tense exchange. "Why did you cut the fuel switch?" one pilot shouted. "I didn't do it," the other replied, panicked. Investigators still can't confirm who asked the question and who answered. But they did notice something else. Just after liftoff, the Ram air turbine, known as the RAT, deployed automatically. It's an emergency power source that only activates when... The Ram air turbine, or RAT, is designed to automatically deploy when both engines shut down. It supplies emergency power to the aircraft's main electrical systems. So, the fact that the RAT deployed meant only one thing: something highly unusual had happened inside that plane. The CCTV footage showed the aircraft losing altitude rapidly, and the flight data recorder confirmed it. Both engines' N2 values dropped below their minimum idle speed, a sign that they were no longer producing thrust. Then, at exactly 1:39 p.m. and 5 seconds, ATC recordings captured a desperate Mayday distress call. When the controller tried to respond and ask for the call sign, there was only silence. Moments later, controllers saw the aircraft disappear beyond the airport boundary, crashing before their eyes. Emergency response teams were activated immediately. The aircraft, still aligned with runway 23, struck the chimney of an Army Medical Corps building about 1,600 meters away, then slammed into the BJ Medical College hostel. The wreckage scattered across an area roughly 1,000 feet long and 400 feet wide, a scene of utter devastation. In this horrifying accident, 12 crew members and 229 passengers lost their lives. Tragically, 19 people on the ground also perished. Only one passenger miraculously survived. He had been sitting near an emergency exit, a stroke of luck that saved him from certain death. The 15-page preliminary investigation report detailed everything with stunning precision. Among the debris, investigators found the flap handle assembly locked at 5 degrees, a standard takeoff setting. Perfectly normal, confirmed by flight data as well. The landing gear lever was still in the down position, and though the thrust levers were burned, they were found in the forward position, meaning power was still being applied until impact. But the most shocking discovery was that both fuel control switches were found back in the run position. This proved the pilots had turned them on again before the crash. Now, here's the critical detail. These fuel switches are not easy to move accidentally. Each has a locking mechanism on both sides to prevent accidental operation. To toggle the switch, a pilot must use both hands, one to push the lock and the other to pull and lift or push the switch. It's a deliberate two-step action, impossible to do with just one hand, and that's what makes this case so disturbing. If, as heard on the cockpit voice recorder, neither pilot intentionally turned the switches off, then who did? And if it was somehow an accident, how could both switches, located side by side, move to cut off within just 1 second of each other? The report revealed that the two fuel switches indeed shut off one after another, separated by just a single second, which strongly suggested human action, not a random fault. Later, both were switched back on again, but by then it was already too late. According to the investigation, Engine 1 had its fuel cut for about 10 seconds, and Engine 2 for about 14 seconds before fuel flow resumed. Evidence from the recorders indicated that both engines were beginning to produce thrust again, but the aircraft hit the ground before recovery could happen. Here lies the central mystery. Up until takeoff, everything was perfectly normal. The engines were fine. The fuel was clean. Investigators even tested samples from the fuel truck that had refueled AI-171, but found nothing wrong. So if everything was perfect, why were the fuel switches turned off? Was there a hidden fault in the locking mechanism or something even darker? The report mentioned one crucial piece of information. Back in 2018, the FAA had issued a Special Airworthiness Information Bulletin, SAIB, warning that the fuel control switch locking feature could sometimes disengage or fail. In simpler terms, the locks could slip out of place. This bulletin was based on complaints from Boeing 737 operators, meaning this issue had been seen before. The same switch design, with identical part number 4TL8373D, was used across multiple Boeing aircraft models, including the very Boeing 787 VT-NB involved in this crash. The FAA had warned 7 years earlier that some fuel switches might be installed in a lock-disengaged condition, but Air India skipped the inspection. It wasn't mandatory, just a recommendation. Now, if the lock really had failed and the switches flipped off accidentally, it would be an extraordinary coincidence that both switches moved off within 1 second of each other. And if it wasn't a malfunction, then there's only one other explanation: a deliberate act. But could this have been a pilot suicide? Or was something else at play entirely? The next clue takes us back to another chilling event from 2015. In 2015, something eerily similar shook the world: the Germanwings Flight 9525 tragedy. During that flight, the co-pilot locked the cockpit door from inside when the captain stepped out to use the bathroom. The cockpit voice recorder later revealed that the co-pilot had deliberately crashed the plane into the French Alps. Investigations uncovered that his mental health record had been severely unstable for a long time. Then there was the 2013 Mozambique Flight 470. In that horrifying case, the captain manually set the autopilot altitude to 0 feet when the first officer stepped out of the cockpit. The flight data recorder confirmed that he had done it intentionally. The aircraft plunged straight down and crashed. A few years earlier, in 1999, the Egyptair Flight 990 crash had also left investigators divided. Just before impact, the cockpit recordings captured religious phrases being recited, followed by the aircraft's nose dropping sharply. The Egyptian government claimed it was a mechanical failure, but the FAA believed it was an intentional suicide mission. And even before that, in 1997, the Silkair Flight 185 case shocked everyone. There, the pilot manually switched off both the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, then deliberately put the aircraft into a steep dive, crashing it. Looking at all these chilling incidents from history, investigators noticed one key similarity among all pilot suicide missions: complete radio silence. In every case, the pilot either ignored or refused to respond to ATC calls before crashing the plane. But in the case of Air India Flight AI-171, despite what social media claims, nothing so far supports the suicide theory, at least not according to the current investigation. For one, the pilots of AI-171 turned the fuel switches back on, which they wouldn't have done if their intent was destruction. Secondly, both pilots remained responsive and alert throughout the emergency. They even managed to send out a Mayday distress signal just 2 seconds before impact, proving they were desperately trying to save the aircraft, not crash it. And finally, moments before the crash, the aircraft's nose was observed pitching upward, a detail confirmed by the flight data. That upward movement meant one thing: the pilots were fighting to recover, hoping the engines would reignite and lift the aircraft back into the sky. If it had been a deliberate act, they would never have pulled the nose up or tried to regain altitude. Their actions show determination, not destruction. So, what do you think about this mystery? Could it really have been an accident? Or something else entirely? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this intense and eye-opening investigation video. Don't forget to like and share it with your friends. We'll meet again soon, in another gripping story that will make you question everything you thought you knew.